Right, so over the next few days we're replacing all of the downlights in this property for fire rated equivalents. You see at the moment we've got these older 12 volt halogen lamps which run very hot, so we're coming across some of these old transformers that have burnt out, started to melt, and we've got living space above. You can see just through here there's a route up to the loft room, so these need to be fire rated because there's living spaces above. And then we're coming across an awful lot of this as well, so in each room it's a bit of an older way of wiring. We've got power coming in to this room, off out to the next room. We've got a switched line coming from the light switch or going down to the light switch and back again, and then cable out to the next spot. And this isn't in an enclosure, this is just a tape joint. So as we go along we're going to replace these with this Hager, so what is it, J501 enclosure, which is designed for this use. You know, it sort of slides up nicely into the downlight hole. Plenty of room to make connections off. So you've got your loop in, loop out, get all your CPCs or earths in there, get your neutrals, and then you switched live out to your fitting, and onto the next one there. You've got the cable clamps, got a sort of snap shut mechanism, and then the screw just to secure it. So any screwed joints need to be accessible for maintenance. So it's not a maintenance free joint this, but when we complete our minor work certificate we'll note down the exact downlight position where each of these joint boxes are located. So you can see here we've got the first couple of cables in. Now these boxes have little knockouts here. So you see I've taken the top and bottom knockout out on both sides so that when we close that, you see it fits around the cable. If we've only got one cable in there, we don't need to take this top knockout out. It just reduces the gap in there, so we're not inadvertently touching cables. And then we've got, you see I've only taken the bottom knockout there because we've only got one cable coming out to feed the downlight at this position. Now we see this all the time on a condition report, which is, you know, this work is off the back of a condition report that we've done on this property. If there's any of this coloured basic insulation on show outside of an enclosure, then that has to go down as what we call a C2 code, which is not immediately dangerous, but it has the potential to become dangerous. And therefore that, you know, it's often liken it to a driving test where you can get a number of minors, which would be a C3 code, needs improvement. But if you get one major, a C2 or a C1, then that has to go down as a fail, you know, and this needs to be rectified. So even though that's hidden up above the ceiling, and it might have been like that for a number of years, you know, with basic insulation on show, those tape joints, if someone's pulling that equipment down to, I don't know, maybe change a lamp or change the transformer or something like that, the driver, and there's maybe a little bit of a nick in some of this insulation, then they might get a shock. So yeah, we need to go around and we need to re-terminate any joint like this. So obviously in the process of changing all these downlights, we're making sure that there's no basic insulation on show, that the cable's properly gripped, that there's no big gaps anywhere to get fingers in, that the downlights are fire rated. For what it's worth, they're also IP rated, so good for going in the bathroom. They're IP65, I think. Right, so that's all terminated in there. Got our bit of cable ready to connect the spot up to downlight. That just pushes back up in there, like so. Now we can attach our downlight. So there you go, that's the plug on the cable. You it's nice and tightly grip that cable at the back. We then just have to plug in the fitting, and this facilitates easier testing as well, rather than having to dismantle, pull out all the control gear out of the roof space, the ceiling void. We can just disconnect this connector and get our test probes in there to get test readings. If we're doing insulation resistance tests, we can just really quickly drop all these fittings, pop off the connector, and do our insulation resistance tests without the light fitting in circuit. And we're replacing them with our favourite downlight, Collingwood H2 light. This is an integrated fitting, so you don't change the lamp. Really quick and easy to install for us. It saves you a bit of money on install costs rather than having to make off joint boxes. Just got these push fit connectors for, you know, power into the lamp and then out on to the next one. Clip that onto the cable, and then the fitting itself just plugs straight in. You can get these in different finishes, different colour temperatures, and they do a higher wattage version if you need something a bit brighter, but we find that the light version is suitable for most applications. So with these older halogen lamps, this is all the gear that comes out of the ceiling. First of all, you've got the joint box where you've got power in, power out, to a transformer, and then, you know, to this non-fire rated little ceiling clip. You've got some connections to make here, which, you know, again, that's supposed to sort of clip on, but that just falls off. And then you've got these lamps and the transformers, in fact, which run really hot. And we've, you know, come across it a fair few times where people have maybe insulated their ceiling space without realising that these run really hot. In one case, we attended an emergency call out where cables had actually burnt and resulted in the tripping of an RCD. And now we're replacing all of that stuff. You know, we've already seen these, but this is essentially doing the job of the joint box, the plug, all of the control gear, because it's obviously an LED, so it needs some control gear. You see these are 24 volt, so the transformer for the LED is in there. You've got this heat sink on the back, which serves to also push any insulation up out of the way, keeping the fitting cool. I mean, it doesn't run hot anyway, not like these old fittings, but it just helps dissipate heat. Yeah, there's obviously a lot lighter, a lot less to it. Removing all this old cabling, making sure all the connections are sound. You can see here is one of the extra low voltage drivers that we pulled out of the ceiling. And in this instance, you see the actual lamp holder section has got super hot and melted onto the driver. The driver's been pushed up against that, obviously in the ceiling void. So obviously that's got the potential to catch fire, and then we'll let fire spread to the space above. Yet another superb example of how not to do this. What have we got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cables. We'll just tape together, basic insulation on show. Get your hands, you know, if you get your finger up there to change a driver or something, you can get your hands straight onto bare connections. So this is part of an extension that the customer had done about 20 years ago. And it's just a word of caution. When you get some building work done like this, you have the main contractor, the builder, that'll do all the structural stuff, and then he will probably have his own guys that he uses for, the electric side of things, plumbing, and I suppose, just a word of warning, it's always best to see examples of work, whether it's the actual building itself, the electrics or the plumbing, just to make sure that, you're going to be getting a decent sort of install. I've pulled this down. It's just cables wrapped around other cables up here. It's a right mess. I've got loads of tape joints like this in the ceiling, which, as we find them, we're going through and we're redoing those, making sure that they're all safe. But there's plenty of this sort of stuff hidden in the fabric of the building, and it needn't be like that. Now, this is an old way of doing things, doing all your joints behind a light fitting or in the loft ceiling void or in the floor void. And so, without playing potluck and taking down lights, how would you know where those connections are to service them, make sure these screw terminals are tight and what have you? So what we tend to do now is take all this stuff down to a switch point. So rather than having to get up on the ladders, start pulling down lights down and getting dust everywhere, on our installations, all of these connections, so loop in, loop out, you see we've got bathroom fan here, and then out to the light fittings, that will all be done behind a switch. So you just have to take the switch off, rather than using these connector blocks with screw fittings. We use Wago lever connectors or push fit connectors, which don't necessarily need to be maintained, and they put the right amount of pressure on each connection to make sure that the cable's appropriately gripped, not too tight, not too loose, and it's never going to work itself loose. So it's much better than this old terminal block style fitting. So what I'm having to do here, because there's so many cables at this downlight position, I've just identified 3 that were all permanent live, earth or CPC, and neutral. So we've got power in and then power out to 2 other places. But just to keep things, because trying to get all 6 cables in here and then a 7th cable to the downlight is going to be a bit tight. So we're going to have one box which is just loop in, loop out. That's going up into the ceiling. Then we'll have 4 cables left to drop into the next joint box, which is where I'm going to attach my downlight to. So with these boxes, you've got loop in, loop out for the permanent live. So we've got power coming in, power going out to the next string of lights, and then another out which goes down to the light switch. So permanent live down to the light switch. We've then got a switch line back which comes down to these bottom connections, and this is going to switch the spotlight on once that switch is closed. So we've got power coming back from the switch, a switch line. We've then got it going out to the next spot. This is obviously the first spot. I'm going to just connect that in there. All the neutrals go together, all the earths or CPCs go together, so they don't have to go in any particular order. So here's our original installation certificate when we carried out the consumer unit upgrade at this property. If you look to circuit 25, lighting, kitchen extension, look at the R1, R2, so that's a resistance reading of the fault path within the customer's installation. So basically we want that number to be as low as possible. And although 3.2 is well within the maximum value, or rather the
the total ZS 3.47. If you look a little bit further along that row, that's still well below the 6 and a bit maximum permitted value. Can you see second row down here, lighting kitchen extension, just retested this after we've exchanged all the lights, all the down lights, and we've dropped that by 2 ohms, which is quite a considerable amount. So just by replacing all these lights, remaking off all the connections properly, we brought that resistance reading right down. So it just goes to show that with all these joint boxes buried in the ceiling space, each time there's a screw connection which might have worked itself a bit loose, you're increasing the resistance of the fault path. In this instance, it's still within the maximum permitted values. However, you can see if you leave that too long, I suppose, without maintaining it, it might be that that resistance reading exceeds the maximum value. And what that means is that potentially your trip switch, your MCB, your RCBO might not trip in the required time of 0.4 seconds. That's the maximum allowed disconnection time for a circuit of this type.